Welcome to Spotlight. I'm your host, Amitha. Join us weekly to get inspired by success stories and transformational events. Our guest today is an inspirational female community leader who's making an impact in the community with her work on gender-based violence. She's the current Director of Legal Services at the Barbara Schleifer Commemorative Clinic. It's my pleasure to welcome to our show Miss Deepa Mattoo. Thank you for coming today.
Thank you for inviting me.
So you're doing such great work in the community, much needed work. But before we get into that, tell us a little bit more about your upbringing and education.
So I was born in India. I was born in Delhi, the capital of the country. And I grew up in many different cities around Delhi. My father used to be working with the government, and wherever he was transferred, I was used to pack my stock barrel and move. I did my law from Maharishi Dayanand University in Rohtak near Delhi. It's like 70 kilometers away from Delhi. I became a lawyer at a very young age because in India you have an option of going to law school right after your grade 12. So I was hardly 23, 24 when I became a lawyer.
Nice.
At a very young age. I practiced law for 4 years before I moved on to do my master's and eventually came here.
So what brought you to Canada?
Love.
Nice. We always need more love.
We always need more love. So I met my husband during my law school in India, and he had applied for permanent residency before we got married. So he sponsored me. So I came as a sponsored spouse.
Okay, nice. So you came here. How difficult was it to get back into your career? Because a lot of immigrants do face that challenge as a professional.
It is difficult. And I think it's like one of those things where every generation of immigrants will tell you that it was always hard. Sometimes it was harder than other times. So when I came, re-qualifying to be a lawyer was a tad bit hard. It was also a bit of an isolating experience because back in the day, we were not as connected on Facebook groups, and the social media was not as easily available as it is now. So it was a little bit of an isolating experience. It was tough. I also became a mother right after coming here. So I had a child while I was trying to cross-qualify and write my bar. But it was an amazing journey. I started working before I came into law. As a community legal worker, so that was helpful. Okay. So I came to Canada and I became a new mother as well. So cross-qualifying while having a little child, it was hard. Writing exams, writing bar was tough, but I started working as a project coordinator first and then a community legal worker at the same clinic where I eventually became a lawyer, South Asian Legal Clinic of Ontario. So I was fortunate and privileged that I had a community of support of other people while I was doing the process.
Nice. So yes, like you said, it may not have been a smooth ride, but you just have to keep going and eventually get to your goal. So now tell us more about the area that you focus on with your work.
So currently, my area of focus of work has been working with the issues impacting women and children related to the violence in their lives. But the definition of violence that I work with is not only familial violence or intimate partner violence or sexual assault. It's a little bit more broader than that. The concept of that when communities are living in poverty, they're living in marginalization of not having immigration status, or children who are caught between two parents fighting with each other over the custody battle. All of those issues sometimes also create violence in people's lives. So the definition of violence that I work with is not only specific to people, but it's about the broader concept of violence.
Oh, nice. So you were with the South Asian Legal Clinic, but currently you're with a different group. Tell us a little bit more.
So I work with Barbara Schleifer Commemorative Clinic. It's a legal clinic but it's a multi-agency model, which means that it does not only provide legal services, but it also provides counseling to women who need counseling support. We also provide interpretation. We have over 200 languages of interpretation which is available, which also is an opportunity for a lot of immigrant women and refugee women to actually get trained into becoming interpreters. So it's an employment generation model, and then we provide legal services. So in terms of the work the clinic does, the clinic has been around for almost 25 years now. So the clinic works with the focus of that a client should have the autonomy and an agency to make a choice about their life and the decision about the experience of violence that they're going through. So we work with a lot of women without status and try to get them status, make applications for work permits, and work in situation if they're caught in a criminal law situation, work with them with that too.
Yeah, wow. So there's a lot of work that goes at the clinic that probably a lot of our viewers are not aware of. So we want to focus a little bit more on your area of interest. But before that, it's time for a short break. Welcome back to Spotlight. We are talking to Ms. Deepa Mattoo. So this is great to know your background and why you started focusing on your area of interest, which is gender-based violence. I want to take it a step further. We already heard that you work with multiple groups in terms of the diverse cultures. I wanted to focus on the South Asian community, because violence in the South Asian community, I know we all know it happens, but it's a hush-hush situation, a topic of taboo. Nobody wants to talk about it. It's all about, deal with it. That's what the norm is. What is your opinion on that or take on it?
I think you're right in saying that it's a taboo topic among the South Asian communities, and we try to. I really like the way you say just deal with it is definitely an approach that we see a lot in our families. But I think one thing which I have learned through this journey of working with the communities of diverse background is that violence against women and misogyny is something which is unfortunately persistent in most of the backgrounds. Most of the backgrounds have their own unique challenges as well. Within the South Asian community, I think we know more about South Asian community because we work with South Asian community more, and that's our own home ground. So we understand it a lot more better. But the fact that the violence actually happens in all communities is very much evident from what recently happened with Me Too movement, right? So when that movement happened, and it was a social media movement, and we saw that people from all different parts of the world, from different industries were coming forward and talking about it. But bringing it back to our communities, I think the challenge is that within our own communities, we want to not be homogenized, and we don't want to be associated as if it's our problem only. So, and because we don't want to be homogenized and targeted, we sometimes then try to just keep it among ourselves and not talk about it, because we feel that there is a responsibility of holding our community in good light, which then also means that you don't want to invite racism against yourself. You don't want to invite any attack on the community, and therefore we try not to talk about it at a systemic level. On an interpersonal level within the family's dynamic, there's a lot of codependence in our families. Our families are very, we are very collective in our frameworks. We depend on each other a lot. And because of that dependence, we care a little bit too much about what would people say, what would my community groups say if they learn about the violence in our family. There is still that old belief system that a woman should be the nurturer, she should be the one taking care of the situation. So that nurturer hat sometimes puts extra burden on women, and they're like, even if I'm experiencing violence, I should be taking care of my kids. I should be taking care of my parents and my in-laws. And women don't, unfortunately, put themselves at first. And I think that's where the biggest challenge is.
Yeah. Actually, even taking that a step further, I was going to ask you about honor killing. I mean, it's we have even heard of cases here. You think, okay, if you have the education, you shouldn't be. What is your take on that?
So my take on honor killings or so-called honor-based violence is that when violence against women happens, there is that sense of insult, or that she did not agree with what I was trying to tell her, again in all cultures. The way it is framed sometimes for South Asian cultures is based around the construct of the honor. The reality is there is no honor in killing and there is no honor in violence, right? Anything which is violent is pretty dishonorable. But unfortunately, again, it's like you are, by taking the steps that you're taking and by disgracing that line of control that we have created around ourselves, when a woman disgraces that line of control, families and sometimes their loved ones actually look at them as insulting them and bringing disrepute. So it's, I think, again, goes back to that construct of what will people say.
All about society.
It's all about society. It's all about your reputation. If we deconstruct that notion of reputation is valuable to almost everyone, right? I'm a lawyer. And in my profession, they say your reputation is, goes anywhere in the room before you go, right? A good doctor, a good lawyer, a good accountant, right? Like that reputation is a construct which humans give a lot of value to.
Yes.
Right?
The norm of society.
The norm of society. Yeah. So that honor-based violence or honor-based killing, as we are talking about, is very much an extension of that, a very ugly extension of that. But it goes back to that whole reputation piece, which plays out. And it's very unfortunate that it has happened.
So with your experience and all the work that you do, how do we cut through that barrier?
It's a multi-pronged approach, right? Like you have to educate the young women and empower them and help them gain their agency and make sure that they understand that their safety is paramount and they don't let go of any risk indicators when they see. A threat, when it's happening verbally, needs to be taken seriously, and our young people need to be trained on actually looking at that and observing that carefully. But at the same time, I think our families need to be educated on this notion a little bit and helping them understand and normalize that some of this is not really the norm, and some of this is not really about reputation, because it's about a young person coming to their agency, making choices for themselves. And parenting is not about controlling your children. Parenting is about letting them be best version of what they want to be, right? So I think there is that multi-pronged approach that needs to be deployed, and I think a service sector, or as we call enforcement agencies, also have a big role to play, because they also need to be sensitive to what is playing out in a family unit like that, but at the same time, not take any signs of risk lightly. I think most of the horrendous situations that we have seen play out is when someone did not take those signs of risk seriously enough.
So it's about creating awareness and not taking things for granted.
Absolutely.
So we want to know more, but before that, it's time for a short break. Welcome back to Spotlight. We are talking to the inspirational community female leader, Ms. Deepa Mattoo. So we just heard from you, yes, creating awareness is important. And as you just said, enforcement organizations need to not take things lightly. So from your end, what steps are you specifically taking, or what steps can the general public take?
I think for the general public, in terms of this and the specific steps for so going back to the piece of service providers and enforcement agencies and their risk indicators, I think those are really important. So risk indicators sometimes in a specific community can be different than generic risk indicators. So I'll give you a very simple example. A lot of time in risk assessment, service providers or enforcement agencies say, does the person in your household who's showing the signs of violence, do they have access to weapons? And a lot of times not understanding that if they don't have access to a weapon which is not in the house but might be readily available to them, it might not be their weapon but someone else's weapon that they can access, not digging it deeper, or thinking that sometimes weapons don't have to be a real weapon, it could be something which can be used as a weapon. Similarly, are you restrained? Are you not allowed to go? Is a very simple question, but people ask it in a way as if it's a physical restraint, but a lot of restraint which is put on women and young women mostly, those restraints are very invisible. Those limits which are put around them and those lines that are created around them are very invisible, and they're not necessarily visible restraints, or there's not physical alteration to the house necessarily to see that she's living in a situation which is very confining. And so that mental restraints that are put on people are not necessarily kind of looked into the risk assessments right now. So I would say that that's really important. For general public, I think it is important to be aware of your surroundings, and you can't be just a mute spectator to something which is unfolding around you. And if you see a sign, I think we should be comfortable to be an active bystander who can actually kind of create a disruption in that, which could be by bringing up the topic of these kind of hard topics to people's living rooms and talking about your own values around it. And if you are someone who believes in strong feminist values, or if you believe that women should be treated equally and with respect, you should talk about it, and you should bring it to your family get-togethers. And that should be, it's an important topic to talk about, and we shouldn't shy away from discussing that. So I think those are the two things that I would say we should definitely keep in mind.
One question I had is, what if the victim is in fear of the perpetrator? How can they access your services or the help of someone without that threat actually becoming a reality?
That's a really good question. I think accessing services, whether, calling the clinic I'm working right now or the clinic where I used to work before or any other service, making a phone call is, I think, one of the most easiest way to get in touch with someone. You definitely need to make sure that when you're making that call, and if you are, you don't want that person to know that you're making that call, that you do it in a safe way. There are a lot of services available online as well. But again, if you're going online and looking at a website, you want to make sure that you clear the history right after, because if the person also uses the same computer, you don't want them to track you down. I work with a lot of women have worked in a lot of women in past who were surviving violence, not necessarily wanting to leave right away. And they had many reasons not to leave right away. And surviving violence can also be a lot more manageable if you're not isolating yourself and you have spoken to someone. If someone is telling you there are shelters available, if you need to leave the house temporarily or even permanently, there is a way to do it in a safe way. Someone can at least think with you about your safety planning. So accessing services over the phone, I think even today is the most common way of women trying to access our services. But if you're completely not comfortable with these two ideas, like my clinic, for example, does a lot of low barrier drop-in groups where you can just come to a drop-in group, and some of them are art-based, and you can just come and do some art and feel the place out and see how comfortable you get to start talking about what's going on with you. There are lots of education groups which are run out of libraries. There are education sessions that are run out of settlement services. Going to those sessions and not necessarily wanting to do something, but to gain more knowledge. I think once you know what you can do, it's always easier to do it, rather than trying to take a step when you don't know what's happening. So I think educating yourself, even if you're not experiencing violence, educating yourself about, if violence happens in my life, what can I do?
Always be proactive.
Always be proactive. So know your rights is, I think, really important.
Well, it sounds like there's a lot of education happening with the general public with all that you do, but I understand you are also with the faculty. So tell us a bit more about how you're educating the future generation lawyers.
So at the clinic we do, I'm basically part of 2 clinical education programs, and these 2 programs are, one is at the University of Toronto, so I take 2 students every year from there who work with the clinic. One works with me and one works with other lawyers, and we basically it's a practical training of how to be a lawyer who works with the social justice framework. With the Osgood Hall, which is our York University Law School, we actually run a program called Feminist Advocacy Program, and we take around 12 students every year in that program. It's a 9-credit program. They actually go through a structured training of critically understanding feminist lawyering, and then also learning the practical way of practicing with women who are experiencing violence. So it's a 1-year-long program. They do 2 rotations with us. And I've been doing this for almost close to 3 years now, and it's like one of the favorite parts of my job, because I feel like being a lawyer is in itself a very diverse field. You can be the prime minister of the country to running your own small office somewhere. So the spectrum is really wide in terms of what all you can do with a law degree. But people who choose to do social justice lawyering is a smaller percentage. And as someone who has chosen the path of being a social justice lawyer, I feel like training the next generation is one of the important things that I should be engaged in, because people need to know that there are other alternate ways of being a lawyer, and this is one of those ways.
Well, it's been a pleasure talking to you today because we got to learn more about a topic that we all should be aware of, vigilant of, and talking about. And we are very grateful that you're doing the work you do and very inspired by you today. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us.
Thank you, Amitha.
Thank you. So that was Miss Deepa Mattoo, who has inspired us today to be listening to the needs of our community. Well, that's a wrap for this week's show. Thank you for watching us. Continue to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and write to us at spotlight@ethnicchannels.com. Until next week, this is Amitha signing off, encouraging you to listen to your community.